Yet another Retina 3C. This one, I'm told, has a failed shutter cocking rack. It's been to another repairer who decided that you couldn't get parts and gave up on it. Now, I just noticed something instantly there. When I move the knob here, the needle doesn't track. So that mechanism is somewhat sticky, I'd say, and will need some attention. The meter, it only works if you press on the selenium cell. It means it's got a bad contact behind there, so the meter's going to need work. As for the failed cocking rack, what do you think we'll find? Let's see what the symptoms are. Film advance is absolutely locked up. I press the film release button, makes no difference. Alright, let's have the top off. See what there is to see. Back catch seems a little bit stiff. Off with the rewind. Some corrosion on the top cover there. 2 screws at this end of the top cover. Off with the top cover. Doesn't want to lift off. What's going on there? Oh, the meter glass is loose. That was just waiting for an opportunity to fall into something, get broken and jam up the film advance. The shutter release button is really sticky. So I'd say that the shutter cocking rack is just one of many troubles with this little camera. And I'll have to work my way through it. And see what we can see. That back catch has certainly got problems. Okay, let's take this off and this. Shutter cocking rack. Well, yes, it certainly looks like that's a problem because the tooth there is right on the crest of that thing. Oh, yeah, teeth are mangled here. I'd say it's been pulled out past the end of the rack and then pushed back. So I think that cocking rack is finished. I can pull the camera down and work my way through it. Start off with removing the rangefinder. And the rangefinder, you can see through it. That's about all you can see. The strap lug can come off. The strap lug is slightly bent. Well, that's hardly news. They frequently are. Take the strap plug off there. Let's have the rewind assembly off. I can see the back of the camera is all over Zeiss bumps too. So might have to strip the leatherette off that. Let's have that chrome strip off. Oh, let's see, that screw's a bit tight. those spacers or shims. There's the cocking rack. That's ruined. Now why did it die? They don't die just from old age. In fact, they probably rarely die just of old age. There's usually something that leads to it failing. Now the screw's loose on the top here. That's not loose. That's not loose. Sometimes you get wear in the bush here, and it allows the gear to push away from the rack. Effectively means that you end up with contact just on the tips of the teeth, and then you end up with failure like that. There's no obvious problem there. This is tight in here. If this gap isn't quite large enough, what you end up with is too much friction at this point, which means that when you're applying force at this point, something wants to give, and unfortunately it's often the teeth. That certainly feels to be much too tight in there. Now that can be just down to grit and corrosion. The rack teeth at this end do not appear to be too bad, really. Okay, so is there a spring on this? No, there's not, so we won't be losing it. Let's remove the screw and the spring from the top of the release lever. We'll remove the circlip and the spring from the lock lever. Take that screw out. To inspect that gear closely to see that the teeth are still good. In most cases, even if the teeth are stripped on the rack, the teeth on that gear are still fit for use. In most cases. But it's certainly something you need to be aware of, that there could be a problem there. And if the problem's limited to one or two teeth, you can typically rotate the position of that gear so that the damaged portion is not being required to do any work. That screw's tight. The thread's tight. I think that's been bent. Yeah, that's bent. Now, sometimes people will bend that screw to push it inwards to create more tension on the cocking rack. And that may have been what happened with that one. If they overdo it, there'll be too much tension on there and it'll load up that cocking rack. It might have undesirable effects. But I suspect someone certainly leant on that and done bad things to it. Let's have the screws off this back catch cover, back catch release cover. They're only chromed brass, they're quite easily damaged. You need to be quite careful with those. The leatherette patch on the advance lever, that's lifting, so you should be able to get under that. Yes. There's no immediate sign that that's been off before. Typically you can tell when they've been off before because there will be more than one type of adhesive stuck on the back of the leatherette or stuck on the lever, as the case may be. Well, that's stuck to the case. So that's a little rubber buffer on the Film Advance. That's why the Film Advance lever didn't want to move. It was glued to the case. See if I can get under this leatherette. It's quite dirty. The adhesive is fairly brittle by the feel of it. It's cracking, like you can hear cracking noises that parts company with the metal. It's sticking better to the aluminium casting than it is to the chromed brass trim plate. It's good when leatherettes come off as easily as this one. You can hear the scalpel scraping against the metal there, so I'm getting right down underneath that glue layer. Okay, so that's off. You can see corrosion here, that white stuff, that's corrosion on the aluminium body casting. Chrome trim here is a little bit untidy looking. A lot of that mess is just remains of adhesive and so forth, and that'll clean away. I'll put that through the ultrasonic. The back catch, of course, was sticky, so we'll have to have a look at that. Take out the lock lever, take out the release lever and recover the spring. The spring's a little bit bent. We'll get that off, should be able to straighten that up. Tripod socket, are the screws loose? No, it's not even loose. Nine out of 10 cases these screws are loose. Bit of corrosion on the screws, that's quite normal. Where's my pliers? We'll need this off for a start. Just sorting the parts out, all the pieces that are going to go through the ultrasonic cleaner into one heap, and all the parts that need to be cleaned by hand in another. Single screw here drives the sprocket shaft, the sprocket from the sprocket shaft. Here's the sprocket shaft, and there's the sprocket. From the top of the camera, here's our film advanced shaft bush and gear. Here's the clutch. Disassemble that. Just unhook the spring from the rewind button catch and undo that screw. Three screws hold the advanced shaft bush to the casting, accessible through these three holes. It was stuck in with grease. Just retrieve the 2 screws from that, make sure I've got them separated. And take out the film spool, take up spool. The metal bush here needs to go through the cleaner. There's a film chip, another one on the base of the take up spool, and another one in there. Film chips, if you get a build up of them, they can make the film advance quite stiff in action. If you get one chip in an unfortunate place, it can jam the whole camera up. Now this back catch, what's going on here? Now I can see some corrosion around here. It really is stiff. I think we'll have to have that apart. I know I'm going to have to get the leatherette off the back. You can see those bumps. Looks like a case of the pox, this one. I'll have to try and lift this leatherette off the end so I can remove the back catch. Let's have the door off the front. So we have a hinge pin screw top and bottom. There's usually at least 1 washer, sometimes as many as 3 or 4. On the door to take the rattle out of the hinge point there. There's 2 at the top. One at the bottom by the looks of it. Just looking to see if there's anything unusual about the lens and shutter. Focus is very stiff and you can hear that noise. It's full of sand, full of it. I better get that lens and shutter off the front. Right, let's engage this tool. There's our lens and shutter assembly. Oh, I'm missing a screw. The flash coupling here is buggered up. Someone hasn't fit that back properly. That's not sitting correctly in its recess. So that's had a hard life. Pop that to one side. Let's carry on stripping down the body. I want to get these parts in the ultrasonic cleaner, getting degreased and then cleaned in a strong detergent to remove all the grime. This camera is certainly a bit of a ruffian. It's comparatively complete, that's the main thing, and with a bit of work it'll probably fly again. Okay, so I need to mark the position of stuff here so I can get everything back where it came from. So normally I adjust this so that I've got the, if I can achieve it, so that I've got the inner and outer helical on the same plane, that they're level with each other. I scribe 2 lines across at the base, 1 line across at the top, just using the tip of a scalpel to scribe that. Now I've got my alignment marks. It means I know exactly where the film focus scale ring fits to the outer helical. and because I scribed them at the point where the outer and the inner were level with each other at the front, I know exactly how those two components are to be aligned, because the helical has a multi-start. Means you can start at a number of positions, all but one of which will be wrong. So by marking that, I'll know when I've got it in the right place. Those 4 screws hold the bellows to the back of the front standard, those black ones. These round head nickel plated screws hold this focus mount onto the front standard. These flat ones, these countersunk head screws, they hold this assembly together. Take that out, get all those screws in my bin of parts, and I'm preparing to put in the cleaner. It's all the screws off, getting the retainer plate off, remove the inner and outer helical together, unscrew those, because I've already marked how they go, so I don't need to do anything else with those. Now I want the shroud and the front standard off here. The bellows should drop back into the body. 2 screws at the top. Two screws at the bottom. Now if someone had foolishly decided to replace the shutter cocking rack in this camera, it would have been a complete waste of time. Given the state of this is chocker with sand and filth. And speaking of sand, it'd be like building on sand, trying to make a working camera out of this by chasing up the most obvious fault. The camera is, what, 65 years old? No more than that. And it's done those years very hard. So with old cameras, you can't treat them like new cameras with an isolated fault. They have never got an isolated fault. They have multiple faults, one of which might have caught your attention, but it'll never be the only one. And if you want a working camera out of it, they need to be stripped right down. So that everything gets the attention it needs. If stuff doesn't move as smoothly as it should do because of dried grease or filth or sand or corrosion, then it means that components will be under an undue stress when you put your big fat thumb on the film advance lever and start pushing, and something will break. And that's always a painful experience. Right, these parts off to the ultrasonic cleaner. And this body, I will need to clean this very carefully. There's no obvious sign it's ever been serviced, so I'd say it probably hasn't. And unlike many cameras, it didn't spend the last 65 years carefully tucked away in a dresser drawer. This camera has been used and abused. Alright, back later. Well, while those parts are buzzing away in the ultrasonic cleaner, I've got to see if I can lift off these leatherettes. there'll be corrosion under them. The leatherettes certainly aren't stuck down fast. And this one I want off anyway because I want to remove the back catch, which is not working very well. That's all corrosion, that white stuff. See great patches of it there. Well, looks like the one on this side's not much better, so we better have that off at the same time. Better safe than sorry with leatherettes like this. Bit of damage on that corner there. And the leatherette on the back. I'll see if I can get this leatherette off the camera back next. It may or may not go well. But get up, once I get past the corners, it's easier to peel the stuff back, but leatherette on corners, on edges, is often stuck very well. And is inclined to crack because old leatherette loses all its flexibility. It becomes quite brittle. So I can't just peel this back. I've got to very carefully get underneath it with the scalpel if I can. I'm using the scalpel as much as a lever as anything else to lift the leatherette. And there'll be corrosion and rubbish underneath this leatherette. And all those bumps will be individual bumps of corrosion that have formed under there, usually over rivets. There's quite a surprising number of rivets in the construction of a camera back like this. Okay, well I've sort of worked my way down to that corner now. I'm just using the scalpel as a lever to prise that off. Okay, well there's the leatherette. You can see all that, those white spots there where the bumps are, that's all corrosion product. That's from the aluminium camera back in the main, and all of this has got to come off. Got to scrape that back to clean surface before I glue the leatherette back in place. Look at that, that's all presumably salts of aluminium. Right, this back catch, that certainly you can press on the back as much as you like, it makes no effort to click into place. 2 screws on the side here. just removes the cover and we can sort of look there and see what's happening. It looks to be just mostly corrosion is the problem there. So I want to remove this whole arm here. Now that button is screwed into this arm. And I'll need to get that loose. I'll have to find a pair of pliers to do that job. Well, these circlip pliers, these crimp lug pliers will do. I just need to loosen that button. It'll probably just unscrew that with my fingers now. Now there's a tiny spring there. It's fairly easily lost, you've got to be careful with that. And I can remove that bracket entirely. Now there's some corrosion on there, and the surface at the end here where it would clip in, that's a little bit rough and dirty looking. A bit of corrosion on the inside too. Likewise on the end of the body you can see there's rust marks there. They'll need to be all cleaned away. On the door itself, the matching part, that doesn't look too bad. I think if we clean all this stuff up, lubricate that with a bit of, I will certainly use molybdenum paste, but you could use graphite grease or anything else to do that job. But this body, I need a lot of cleaning here. You can see the level of the filth in there, that's pretty grimy. So all that corrosion and rubbish has got to come off the casting where the leatherettes are going to go back on, and the camera back the same. Meanwhile things are cooking away in the ultrasonic cleaner. The shroud here, likewise that's absolutely filthy, absolutely full of sand. All of this stuff needs to be cleaned, and then I'll clean down my workbench and get ready for the reassembly once I've got clean components.